I never thought a bright orange snow shovel would land me in court. But then again, I never expected to live in a neighborhood where the HOA president measured the grass with a ruler either. My name is Yannick Rodriguez, and I moved to Pinewood Valley, a planned community just outside of Boulder, Colorado, in November 2023. The neighborhood looked perfect when my wife Sandra and I first toured it. Neat rows of two-story homes with those little front porches, well-maintained streets, and mountain views that made you feel like you were living in a postcard. What they did not show us during the tour was the 300-page HOA handbook, or the fact that our HOA president, Patricia Summers, had nothing better to do than patrol the streets looking for violations like some kind of suburban bounty hunter. The first snowfall came in early December, about 3 weeks after we had moved in. I woke up to find about 8 inches of fresh powder blanketing everything. Beautiful, sure, but I had to get to work. I went to my garage, grabbed the snow shovel I had bought from a hardware store in Denver the previous week, and started clearing my driveway. It was a solid shovel, ergonomic handle, wide blade, and yes, it was bright orange. I liked that color because it was easy to spot in the garage among all my other tools. I was about halfway through clearing the driveway when I heard a car pull up. A silver Lexus stopped right in front of my house, and out stepped a woman in her mid-50s wearing a puffy white coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she wore those oversized sunglasses that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cold morning air. "Are you aware that you are in violation of community standards?" I stopped shoveling and looked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what?" She marched up my driveway, her designer boots crunching through the snow I had not cleared yet. "Patricia Summers, HOA president. Your snow removal equipment does not comply with the aesthetic guidelines outlined in Section 47, subsection 12 of the Community Handbook." I stared at her, then at my shovel, then back at her. "My shovel? That color is completely unacceptable. All outdoor equipment visible from the street must be in earth tones or neutral colors. Black, brown, gray, or forest green. That orange monstrosity is an eyesore and diminishes the property values of every home in this community." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "You're joking, right?" Her expression did not change. "I assure you, Mr. Rodriguez, I am completely serious. This is your first warning. If you continue to use that shovel where it can be seen from the street, you will receive a formal citation and fine." "How much of a fine are we talking about?" I asked, still not quite believing this was real. $50 for the first offense, doubling with each subsequent violation. I strongly suggest you purchase appropriate equipment. Have a good day." She turned on her heel and walked back to her Lexus, leaving me standing there in my half-cleared driveway, holding my apparently illegal orange shovel. Sandra thought I was exaggerating when I told her about it that evening. She said, "What about your shovel?" I'm serious. Apparently, the color orange is too offensive for the delicate sensibilities of Pinewood Valley. My wife shook her head, laughing. "That's insane. You're not actually going to buy a new shovel, are you?" "Hell no, it's a shovel. I'm not spending another $40 because some HOA president has too much time on her hands." That turned out to be a decision that would cost me a lot more than $40, at least temporarily. 2 days later, we got another snowfall. I used my orange shovel again, because I am not the kind of person who gets pushed around by ridiculous rules. Sure enough, 3 days after that, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a citation from the Pinewood Valley HOA, complete with a grainy photo of me shoveling my driveway, my orange shovel prominently featured. The fine was $50, payable within 30 days. I showed it to Sandra. Can they actually do this? She read through the citation, frowning. I mean, we did sign the HOA agreement when we bought the house. But this seems excessive. It's not just excessive, it's stupid. What am I supposed to do, hide in my garage and only shovel in the middle of the night? Maybe you should just get a different colored shovel. Pick your battles, you know. But this felt like more than just a battle over a shovel. This felt like a test to see how far Patricia Summers could push the residents of this neighborhood. I had heard rumors from some of our neighbors about other ridiculous fines. The Hendersons 2 doors down got fined because their Christmas wreath was 6 inches too large. The Johnsons across the street got cited because their son's basketball hoop was visible from the street during non-approved hours. It was getting out of hand. I decided to go to the next HOA meeting, which was held in the community center on a Wednesday evening. About 30 people showed up, most of them looking tired and worn down. Patricia Summers sat at the front of the room with 2 other board members, Diane Mitchell and Robert Green, neither of whom ever seemed to speak. The meeting covered the usual boring stuff like budget reports and landscaping contracts. Then they opened the floor for resident comments and concerns. I raised my hand. Patricia acknowledged me with a slight nod. Mr. Rodriguez, I stood up. I want to talk about the citation I received for using an orange snow shovel. With all due respect, this seems like a massive overreach. It is a tool that I use for maybe 20 minutes at a time. How does that impact property values or community aesthetics? Several people in the room nodded in agreement. Patricia's expression remained neutral, almost bored. The rules are clearly outlined in the community handbook that you signed and agreed to when you purchased your home. If we start making exceptions, the entire structure of our community standards breaks down. The fine stands. But the rule is unreasonable, I pressed. Who actually cares what color my shovel is? I care, Patricia said coldly. And as president of this HOA, it is my responsibility to maintain the standards that make Pinewood Valley one of the most desirable communities in Boulder County. If you do not wish to follow the rules, perhaps you should have chosen to live elsewhere. The room went quiet. A few people looked uncomfortable. I realized then that Patricia Summers was not just overzealous. She was on a power trip and she had no intention of backing down. I sat back down, frustrated. Sandra squeezed my hand. "Let it go," she whispered, but I could not let it go. When the next snowfall came a week later, I used my orange shovel again. Call it stubbornness, call it principle, but I was not going to let Patricia Summers dictate what color tools I could use on my own property. This time, I made a point of shoveling early in the morning when I knew she made her rounds through the neighborhood. Sure enough, I saw her silver Lexus cruise past slowly, and I gave her a friendly wave with my orange shovel held high. The look on her face was priceless. The citation came the next day. This time, the fine was $100. The letter included a sternly worded warning that continued violations could result in liens being placed on my property. That was when Sandra put her foot down. "Yannick, this is getting out of hand. Just buy a gray shovel and be done with it." "It's not about the shovel anymore," I told her. "It's about the fact that she thinks she can bully people into submission. Someone needs to stand up to her. And that someone has to be you. Why not me?" Sandra sighed. "Because it's going to cost us money we do not have. Because it is going to be stressful. Because it is a shovel, Yannick. A shovel." She had a point, but I was already too far in to back down now. I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I called a lawyer. The attorney's name was Marcus Chen, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, in one of those renovated historic buildings with exposed brick walls and modern furniture. I met with him on a Thursday afternoon, bringing every piece of documentation I had, including the citations, the HOA handbook, and photos of my orange shovel. Marcus was in his late 30s, sharp-eyed and well-dressed in a way that made you feel like he knew what he was doing. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and smiled slightly. "So let me get this straight. They are fining you because your snow shovel is orange." "That is correct." "And they are basing this on a provision in the HOA handbook about outdoor equipment needing to be in neutral or earth tone colors. Section 47, subsection 12. Marcus flipped through the handbook I had brought, finding the relevant section. He read it carefully, then read it again. Then he started laughing. "What?" I asked. "This is poorly written," he said. "Really poorly written. Look at the exact language. All outdoor equipment permanently installed or regularly visible from street-facing areas of the property must conform to approved color guidelines." The key words here are permanently installed and regularly visible. A snow shovel that you use for a few minutes and then store in your garage does not meet that criteria. I felt a surge of hope. So they do not have a case. Not only do they not have a case, but they are potentially engaging in selective enforcement and harassment. Tell me, have you seen any of your neighbors using non-approved colored equipment? I thought about it. Yeah, actually. The guy 3 houses down has a bright blue garden hose on a reel attached to his house. It is visible year-round, and there is a house on the next street with a red mailbox, which I am pretty sure is also not an earth tone. Marcus made more notes. Good, very good. Here's what I think we should do. We send them a formal letter explaining why their citations are invalid based on their own poorly written rules. We request that they rescind the fines and issue a formal apology. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit for harassment, selective enforcement, and emotional distress. Will that actually work? Depends on how stupid they are, Marcus said bluntly. Some HOAs back down as soon as a lawyer gets involved. Others double down and make everything worse for themselves. Based on what you have told me about this Patricia Summers, I am guessing she is the doubling down type. He was right. Marcus sent his letter to the Pinewood Valley HOA board the following Monday. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing, polite but firm, laying out exactly why the citations were invalid and demanding that the fines be rescinded within 10 business days. He sent me a copy, and I felt genuinely optimistic for the first time in weeks. The response came 9 days later, and it was not what we hoped for. Patricia Summers, writing on behalf of the board, rejected our argument completely. Her letter stated that the HOA had the authority to interpret its own rules, and that their interpretation clearly applied to any equipment visible from the street, regardless of how temporarily it was used. She also noted that I had been belligerent and uncooperative, and that my continued violations demonstrated a pattern of disrespect for community standards. The fines would not be rescinded. In fact, since I had used the orange shovel 2 additional times since the last citation, she was adding another $200 to what I owed, bringing the total to $350. The letter concluded with a threat. If I did not pay within 15 days, they would place a lien on my property and potentially pursue legal action to force the sale of my home to recover the debt. I called Marcus immediately. They are threatening to take my house over a shovel. Let them try, Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. They just made this so much easier for us. Forward me that letter right now." 2 weeks later, we filed a lawsuit against the Pinewood Valley HOA, Patricia Summers in her capacity as president and the other 2 board members. The suit claimed wrongful fines, harassment, selective enforcement, violation of Colorado HOA statutes, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We requested that the court invalidate all fines, award damages, and potentially remove Patricia Summers from her position. The local news picked up the story. Apparently, HOA sues homeowner over orange snow shovel was too ridiculous not to cover. A reporter from a Denver news station came to interview me, and I told the whole story on camera. The segment aired that evening, and suddenly, I was getting calls and messages from people all over Colorado who had their own HOA horror stories. The publicity did not make Patricia Summers back down. If anything, it made her angrier. She gave her own interview to the same news station, sitting in what looked like her perfectly decorated living room, wearing pearls and looking like she was about to host a tea party. "People like Mr. Rodriguez think the rules do not apply to them," she said in that condescending tone I had come to know so well. "They move into a community that has standards, that has worked hard to maintain property values and aesthetic harmony, and then they decide they are special. They can do whatever they want. This is not about a shovel. This is about respect for your neighbors and the community you chose to join." The reporter asked her if she thought threatening to take someone's home over a shovel color was excessive. "We have a process," Patricia said coolly. "If people do not follow the rules, there are consequences. That is how communities function. Without enforcement, you have chaos." The interview made her look even worse than I expected. The comments section on the news station's website was brutal. People called her a tyrant, a control freak, and several names I would not repeat. A few people defended her, saying HOAs existed for a reason and rules were rules, but they were definitely in the minority. The court date was set for February, about 2 months after we filed the suit. In the meantime, winter continued and we kept getting snow. I kept using my orange shovel and Patricia Summers kept documenting it. She sent me a citation after every single snowfall, each one adding to the total she claimed I owed. By the time we went to court, the alleged debt had ballooned to over $700. Marcus was not worried. "Every citation she sends just proves our harassment claim. She is building our case for us." Discovery was enlightening. Marcus subpoenaed HOA records going back 5 years, and what we found was incredible. Patricia Summers had issued over 400 citations to various residents during her 3 years as president. Most of them were for tiny, ridiculous violations like mine. A flower pot on a porch was the wrong shade of terracotta. A doormat had a pattern instead of being solid colored. Someone's cat was photographed sitting in a window, and Patricia tried to claim it was a violation because pets were supposed to be kept indoors and out of sight. Even more interesting was what we did not find. There were dozens of potential violations throughout the neighborhood that Patricia had never cited. The blue garden hose I mentioned. That homeowner happened to be Robert Green, one of the board members. The red mailbox. That belonged to Patricia's next-door neighbor, whom we discovered from further records was her friend. There was selective enforcement happening on a massive scale. We also deposed Patricia Summers, and that was an experience I will never forget. She showed up to Marcus's office dressed like she was going to a business meeting, projecting this air of superiority that filled the room. Marcus was polite and professional, but he asked questions that clearly made her uncomfortable. "Mrs. Summers, can you explain why you cited Mr. Rodriguez for an orange shovel, but have never cited Mr. Green for his Blue Garden hose. The hose is a permanent installation for watering purposes. That is different. But according to the handbook, permanent installations must conform to approved colors even more strictly than temporary equipment. So why has Mr. Green never been cited? Patricia shifted in her seat. I was not aware the hose was there. You were not aware. You drive through the neighborhood multiple times per week looking for violations. Mr. Green's house is on your street. You have issued citations for flower pots 3 houses down from him. Are you saying you never noticed a bright blue garden hose mounted on the side of his house? I must have overlooked it. I see. And the red mailbox at 487 Maple Drive, the property owned by Jennifer Carson, whom I understand is a personal friend of yours. Mailboxes are a different category. What category would that be? I have reviewed the entire handbook, and there is no separate section for mailbox colors. Patricia's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Gerald Hopkins, kept objecting, but there was only so much he could do. By the end of the deposition, it was clear that Patricia had been enforcing rules based on personal preference and using her position to target people she did not like while giving her friends and allies a pass. We also got testimony from other residents. The Hendersons, who had been fined for their oversized Christmas wreath, testified about how Patricia had measured their wreath with a tape measure while standing on their porch uninvited. The Johnsons talked about how their teenage son had been in tears after Patricia threatened that their family would lose their home over a basketball hoop. One older gentleman, Frank Morrison, testified that Patricia had cited him 8 times in 1 year, mostly for minor issues with his lawn, even though he was 83 years old and doing his best to maintain the property on a fixed income. The picture that emerged was of an HOA president who had turned a position of community service into a personal fiefdom, wielding the power to fine and threaten whoever she pleased. The trial itself took 3 days. It was held in Boulder County District Court, with Judge Ellen Hartwell presiding. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for not tolerating foolishness. Marcus presented our case methodically. He showed the citations I had received, demonstrated that the shovel was only visible from the street for brief periods, and highlighted the vague and poorly written nature of the HOA rule in question. He presented evidence of selective enforcement, showing photo comparisons of violations Patricia had pursued versus identical violations she had ignored. He brought in the testimony from other residents, painting a picture of systematic harassment. The emotional distress component was harder to quantify, but Marcus had me testify about the stress the situation had caused. I talked about how I dreaded snowfall because I knew it would lead to another citation. How I felt anxious in my own home, worried about what minor detail Patricia might find to penalize next. How my wife and I had argued about whether we should just sell the house and move, even though we had only lived there for a few months and loved everything about the neighborhood except the HOA. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that HOAs needed broad authority to enforce their rules, and that Patricia had been acting in good faith to protect property values. He claimed that the rules were clear, and that I had willfully violated them. He suggested that I was a troublemaker who had manufactured this entire conflict for attention. Judge Hartwell did not seem impressed by that argument. On the 3rd day, she heard closing arguments from both sides. Marcus delivered a passionate speech about property rights, the limits of HOA authority, and the danger of allowing petty tyrants to abuse their power. Gerald Hopkins gave a much more subdued closing, essentially arguing that HOAs had to be allowed to enforce their rules or they served no purpose. Judge Hartwell said she would issue her ruling within a week. Those were a long 7 days. I tried to focus on work, tried to be present for Sandra, but my mind kept circling back to the case. What if we lost? What if the judge decided that the HOA had the right to fine me for my shovel, and I ended up owing them not just the fines but their legal fees too? What if we had to sell our house? Sandra tried to reassure me. Marcus seems confident, and the judge asked a lot of tough questions to their lawyer. Judges are supposed to do that. It does not necessarily mean anything. You did the right thing, she said firmly. Even if we lose, you stood up for what was right. I am proud of you. That helped a little. The ruling came down on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus called me at work, and I could hear the excitement in his voice before he even said anything. We won. We won everything. I nearly dropped my phone. Everything. Judge Hartwell invalidated all the fines, every single one. She ruled that the HOA's interpretation of their own rule was unreasonable, and that the selective enforcement proved they were acting in bad faith. She awarded us $9,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress, plus all of our legal fees, which is another $12,000. The HOA has to pay for everything. I could not speak for a moment. $21,000. $21,000, Marcus confirmed, and there is more. Judge Hartwell included a section in her ruling strongly suggesting that the residents of Pinewood Valley should consider recalling their HOA board and revising their governing documents. She stopped short of ordering it, but her language was pretty clear. She called Patricia Summers's conduct an abuse of authority bordering on malicious, and said the HOA had lost sight of its purpose to serve the community. I sat down at my desk, my legs suddenly shaky. So it is over. It is over. You can use whatever color shovel you want. Hell, you can paint rainbows on it if you feel like it. That evening, Sandra and I celebrated with a nice dinner at a restaurant in Boulder. We toasted with glasses of wine, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, but the story was not quite over yet. The ruling was public record, and the local news picked it up immediately. This time, the story went beyond local stations. National news outlets started covering it. HOA ordered to pay $21,000 over orange snow shovel was apparently the kind of feel-good, stick-it-to-the-man story that people loved. I did a few more interviews, and Marcus did several as well, talking about the broader issues with HOA overreach. In Pinewood Valley, things got interesting. Within 2 weeks of the ruling, a group of residents organized a recall petition against Patricia Summers and the other 2 board members. Colorado law allows HOA members to recall their board with a majority vote, and the petition gathered more than enough signatures to force a special meeting. I attended that meeting, held in the same community center where I had first tried to reason with Patricia about my shovel. The room was packed this time. Nearly every household in the neighborhood had at least one person there. The energy was completely different from that first meeting. People were angry, motivated, and ready for change. Patricia Summers showed up, but she looked different. The imperious confidence was gone. She looked tired and defensive. The other 2 board members looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The recall vote was swift and decisive. Patricia Summers, Deanne Mitchell, and Robert Green were removed from the HOA board by a vote of 87-3. I am pretty sure the 3 votes in their favor came from them and maybe one friend. A new board was elected that same night. The president was Frank Morrison, the elderly gentleman who had been fined so many times. Despite his age, he was sharp and fair-minded, and everyone respected him. The new board's first order of business was to review the HOA handbook and remove or revise the most absurd rules. The snow shovel color requirement was eliminated. So were dozens of other overly specific, unenforceable regulations. The next snowfall came in late February. I went out to my driveway with my orange shovel, and this time, I felt nothing but satisfaction as I cleared the snow. Several of my neighbors were out doing the same, and a couple of them waved and called out greetings. One guy, Tom Henderson, shouted across the street, "Nice shovel, Yannick." "Thanks. It is my favorite color," he laughed, and so did a couple of other people who heard. It felt good. It felt like we had taken our neighborhood back. The HOA paid the judgment, though apparently it nearly bankrupted their reserve fund. Frank Morrison told me privately that they would have to do a special assessment to rebuild the reserves, meaning everyone's HOA fees would go up slightly for a year or two. I felt a little guilty about that until Frank waved it off. "This is not on you," he said. "This is on Patricia for being a tyrant and the previous board for letting her get away with it. People understand that. Hell, most of them are grateful you stood up to her. She made everyone's lives miserable." "What happened to her?" I asked. "Patricia, I mean. Is she still in the neighborhood?" "For now. But I heard her house is going on the market soon. I think she knows she is not welcome here anymore. She cannot show her face without people giving her cold looks. That is what happens when you spend years making enemies of your neighbors." I did not feel good about that exactly, but I did not feel bad either. Actions have consequences, and Patricia Summers had learned that the hard way. In March, I got a check in the mail from the Pinewood Valley HOA for $9,000, along with a letter from the new board formally apologizing for the previous board's conduct. Marcus got his fees paid separately. I deposited the check and took Sandra out for another nice dinner. "So what are you going to do with the money?" she asked. "I was thinking we could put it toward that backyard patio you wanted, maybe get a nice grill, some outdoor furniture." "In earth tones, I hope," she said with a straight face. I stared at her for a second, then we both burst out laughing. "I'm getting the brightest, most obnoxious colors I can find," I said. "Hot pink chairs, a lime green table, the works." "The HOA cannot say anything about it," Sandra pointed out. "That rule is gone." "I know, but even if it was not, I would do it anyway. I think I have learned that some battles are worth fighting." Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as things could be in a neighborhood that had just gone through a minor revolution. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual issues like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. They sent out surveys asking residents what they wanted to see changed, and they actually listened to the responses. It was like living in a different community, even though nothing physical had changed. I kept my orange shovel, of course. It became something of a symbol in the neighborhood. A few people even went out and bought brightly colored yard equipment in solidarity. There was a running joke that Pinewood Valley had gone from the most uptight neighborhood in Boulder County to the most colorful. One day in April, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. For a split second, I had a flashback to that first morning when Patricia Summers had confronted me, and I felt a flicker of anxiety. But it was not a silver Lexus. It was a Honda Civic, and the woman who got out was younger, maybe early 30s, with friendly eyes and an uncertain smile. "Hi," she said. "Are you Yannick Rodriguez?" "That is me." "I'm Emily Carter. My husband and I are thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood, and our real estate agent told us about what happened with the HOA. I just wanted to meet you and ask if you think this is a good place to live." I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, yes, it is a great place to live now. We went through a rough patch with bad leadership, but the community came together and fixed it. The new board is great. The neighbors are friendly, and you can use whatever color shovel you want. She laughed. That is really what I wanted to hear. I have lived in HOA neighborhoods before, and some of them are nightmares. My last place fined me because my car was parked in my own driveway for more than 24 hours. Apparently, driveways were only for temporary parking and all cars were supposed to be in garages. That is insane. I know. So we are being really careful this time, but it sounds like you guys have a good thing going here. We do now. It took some work, but we do. Emily thanked me and left, and I felt a strange sense of pride. We had actually made a difference, not just for me, but for everyone in the neighborhood, and even for people who might live here in the future. That summer, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood barbecue in the community park. It was the first social event they had done, and the turnout was incredible. Kids ran around playing while adults stood in groups talking and laughing. Someone set up a volleyball net. Frank Morrison manned one of the grills, flipping burgers and hot dogs with the skill of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. I was standing with Sandra, eating a hamburger and watching the scene, when Tom Henderson came over with a beer in his hand. "Hell of a thing, is not it?" he said, gesturing at the crowd. "What is that, all of this? 6 months ago, everyone in this neighborhood was afraid to put a foot wrong. Now look at us, actually acting like neighbors." He was right. Before all the drama with my snow shovel, most of us had kept to ourselves. We would wave politely but rarely talked. The fear of HOA violations had made everyone cautious and withdrawn. Now people were friendly, open, and actually building relationships. "I guess something good came out of the whole mess," I said. "More than good. You did this, man. You stood up when the rest of us were too scared or too worn down. You made this possible." I shook my head. "I just did not want to buy a new shovel." Tom laughed. "Yeah, well, your stubbornness saved the neighborhood, so thanks." We clinked our drinks together, and I felt genuinely happy. Not because I had won money or proved a point, but because things were actually better now. The community was healthier, stronger, more connected. Later that evening, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across the park, Frank Morrison called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted down, and he stood on a picnic table so everyone could see him. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice carrying across the park. "This time last year, I was thinking about selling my house. I have lived in Pinewood Valley for 12 years, and I loved this neighborhood when I first moved in. But over the past few years, it stopped feeling like home. It felt like living under surveillance, like one wrong move and I would be punished. I know a lot of you felt the same way." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. "But we turned it around," Frank continued. "We stood up, we made changes, and we took our community back. I want to especially thank Yannick Rodriguez, who had the courage to fight back when the rest of us were too tired. Yannick, where are you?" People turned to look at me, and I felt my face getting hot. Sandra nudged me forward, and I reluctantly raised my hand. "Thank you," Frank said, and the crowd started clapping. It was not a huge crowd, maybe 70 or 80 people, but the applause was genuine and warm and made me feel more appreciated than I had expected. "And I want to thank all of you," Frank went on, "for signing the petition, for voting in the recall, for being patient while we worked to fix the rules. This is your neighborhood. You all own it together. The HOA should serve you, not rule over you. That is what we are going to keep doing." More applause, and then the party resumed. But something had shifted. You could feel it in the air. This was not just a barbecue. It was a celebration of reclaiming something that had been taken from us. As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, I thought about the whole experience often. It had been stressful and expensive, even with the damages we won. It had caused arguments with my wife and sleepless nights. But looking back, I would do it all again, because it was not really about a snow shovel. It was about the principle that people should not have to live in fear in their own homes. It was about standing up to bullies, even when those bullies have legal authority behind them. It was about remembering that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. The orange shovel still sits in my garage, right near the door where it is easy to grab. Every time I see it, I smile. It is just a tool, a simple piece of plastic and metal designed to move snow. But it represents something bigger now. It represents the time I decided not to back down. The time a community came together to make things right. People still bring it up sometimes. New neighbors who move in hear the story and come to ask me about it. I have been interviewed for a couple of podcasts and one article in a magazine about HOA reform. Marcus Chen still uses the case as an example in his practice, showing potential clients that you can fight back against unfair HOA rules and win. And Patricia Summers. She did sell her house and move away. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona to a different HOA community. I wonder sometimes if she learned anything from what happened, if she ever reflected on how her actions affected people. I doubt it. People like that rarely do. But at least she is not making anyone's life miserable here anymore. The Pinewood Valley HOA is actually one of the better managed ones in Boulder County now. People use it as an example of how HOAs should operate. Focused on real issues like maintaining shared spaces and organizing community events. Not on measuring grass height with rulers or photographing people's shovels. The handbook has been revised down to a reasonable 50 pages, with clear, specific rules that actually make sense. And there is a new provision that any fine over $25 has to be approved by a majority vote of the board, not just the president acting alone. No more tyrants. I think the biggest change is cultural, though. People are not afraid anymore. They talk to each other. They look out for each other. If someone has a problem with something a neighbor is doing, they talk to them directly instead of running to the HOA to file a complaint. It is how neighborhoods are supposed to work. Last month, we got the first big snowfall of the new winter season. About 10 inches, heavy and wet. I grabbed my orange shovel and headed out to clear the driveway. As I worked, I noticed several of my neighbors doing the same. Tom Henderson had a bright yellow shovel. The family 2 doors down had a red one. Frank Morrison was using a green shovel, though I think his was actually the approved forest green from the old rules. "Nice shovel," I called out to Tom. "Thanks. Got it on clearance specifically because it was a ridiculous color. Figured I should follow your example." We both laughed. It was a good moment. Simple and human and real. That is what a neighborhood should be. Not a pristine, controlled environment where everyone lives in fear of breaking arbitrary rules. But a place where people can be themselves, where a shovel can be orange, where kids can play basketball in their driveways, and where Christmas wreaths can be whatever size makes people happy. I finished clearing my driveway and went inside. Sandra had hot coffee waiting, and we sat by the window watching the snow continue to fall. It was beautiful, peaceful, exactly the kind of scene we had imagined when we first decided to move to Colorado. "Any regrets?" Sandra asked. "About what?" "The whole thing. The fight with the HOA. All the stress and money and drama." I thought about it, really thought about it. No regrets. It needed to happen. She smiled and squeezed my hand. "My stubborn hero." "Just a guy with an orange shovel," I said, but we both knew it was more than that. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most ridiculous conflicts can reveal the biggest problems. That authority needs to be questioned when it stops making sense. That communities are stronger when they stand up for what is right instead of just going along with what is easy. The snow kept falling outside, blanketing everything in white. My orange shovel leaned against the wall in the garage, ready for the next time I needed it. And in Pinewood Valley, life went on, better and more hopeful than before. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do is refuse to back down over something small. Sometimes, that is exactly what changes everything.